Hear ye, hear ye. All persons having anything to do for the Honorable E. Susan Gotch, Justice of the Superior Court, now sitting at Fall River, within and for the Commonwealth. Draw near, give your attendance, you shall be heard. God save the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. This quorum is now in session. You may be seated.
Returning to 2013-983, Commonwealth versus Aaron Hernandez.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning.
Have any of you seen or heard or read or overheard anything at all about this case from Mr. Hernandez since I last inquired? There are no affirmative responses. Have any of you discussed this case in any way, shape, or form, or Mr. Hernandez with anyone since I last inquired? There are no affirmative responses. And have any of you had any difficulty following my instructions not to talk about or in any fashion communicate about or look at or listen to or do any research about this case, anything you think could be relevant to the case or Mr. Hernandez since I last inquired? There are no affirmative responses. The witness may resume the stand.
Just remind you, you're still on drill.
Yes. Thank you.
Mr. Quinn, I believe yesterday when we left off, we were on the last page of the record, exhibit number 255. Is that correct?
Yes.
And we had just you had just discussed this data transmission at 12:52 in the afternoon on June 17th, and that data transmission was coming from that same tower located there on exhibit 291E. Is that correct?
Correct.
And the next data communication in the record shows that it occurred on June 17th at 1:55. Is that correct?
Correct.
And could you tell us what tower that was used to connect the cell phone 3008 for the purposes of this data communication to the T-Mobile network, please?
That would be the tower in the previous slide there. Yes.
That same tower in 291E, correct?
Correct.
And as it regards then the next data transmission that appears on the record at 3:35, what tower was used to connect the 3008 phone to the T-Mobile network at that time?
The location on the previous graphic.
That this same tower in exhibit 291E, is that correct?
Correct.
The next data communication at 3:54 p.m. on June 17th of 2013. Do you see that?
Yes.
And what tower was used for that purpose?
The same one.
Same tower.
Yes.
The next communication at 5:10 p.m. Do you see that?
Yes.
And what tower was used for that communication?
The same tower.
The next tower, or the next communication at 6:17 p.m. for the purposes of transmitting data between the phone 3008 and the T-Mobile network. What tower was used for that purpose?
The same tower.
The next data communication between the phone 3008 and the T-Mobile network at 7:53 p.m. What phone was used for that purpose? Or, I'm sorry, what cell site was used for that purpose?
The same one.
And then you see here in the record the very last data communication between the phone 3008, and the T-Mobile network. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And what time did that take place on June 17th?
8:19 p.m.
And again, sir, what tower in the T-Mobile network was used in the course of that data communication?
The yellow pushpin that's highlighted on this map.
This tower located here, correct?
Correct.
And you went to that location yourself?
Yes,
And did you drive down this particular road here?
I did.
And that's listed here as Alice Agnew Drive, is that correct?
Yes.
And then this road here, that's John Deach Boulevard, correct?
I believe so.
And you see down in the lower corner there, the scale of the map,
Yes.
and that indicates that that distance there, just over 1.5 inches, is 400 yards, correct?
Correct.
And that's how close the tower is to this area located here, is that correct?
Correct.
Nothing further.
Good morning, Mr. Quinn.
Good morning.
Mr. Bomberg asked you about a number of calls and a number of data communications involving the phone of your subscriber that ends in 3008, right?
Correct.
Okay, I'm just going to ask you about a few other such transmissions, okay?
Okay.
First, sir, I'm not sure if you were shown this under examination, so let me show it to you. Could you just look through that document briefly and just tell us if you recognize that as a record kept, that's Exhibit 250, I'm sorry, 258, record of calls and text messages to and from your subscriber 3008 in that same time frame.
Yeah, that's correct.
Thank you. So I'm showing you, this is page 20 of that exhibit. Can you make out the times? No. No. Can you see the times of those calls or not yet? Not yet. Now can you see the times of those calls?
Yes.
Okay. And these are calls on the night of 6/16, right? They all 6/16? I'm sorry, I can't see that. Yeah. Can you see that these are calls on, looking at the date, and then I'm going to move over and show you the time, okay? here's the date, right? See 6:16,
Yes.
and then moving down into the early morning hours of 6:17?
I can't see the time, but
No, I'm going to get to the time in a second, okay? I can't put it all on the screen at once, I think. All right,
To the extent you ask with respect to early morning hours, the witness is not able to.
all right. Let's do 6:16. Thank you, Your Honor. Okay, let's, 6:16. You would agree with me that there's about approximately 15 to 20 entries on 6:16, and then the times ranging from, on this page, 1900, which is 7 o'clock in the evening, all the way to 2346, which is 11:46 in the evening?
yes.
Okay. And I think this is one of those things that's simpler to just show it to the witness, Your Honor. I apologize. You turn to page 20 of that exhibit, please, sir. The pages are numbered on the bottom, I think.
Yeah, I see.
And would you agree with me, sir, that that record reflects somewhere around 15, I didn't count them, somewhere around 15 either calls or text messages sent to or from that phone, 3008, on between 7 p.m. and midnight on June 16th, 2013?
Yes.
Okay. And then turning to the early morning hours of June 17th, between, say, midnight and 2:30 a.m. on the morning of June 17th, approximately how many calls or text messages to or from that same subscriber are reflected on that record?
Till midnight?
From midnight on June 17th until 2:30 a.m. on June 17th.
$25.
Okay, and those are to a number of different numbers, right?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
And let me now go to Exhibit 255. That's just a combined document that has the cell phone tower information in it, right? Well, again, I think it's simpler for you just to look at it yourself. So that's page 3 of that exhibit. Does that reflect the same kind of thing you were talking about yesterday and a few minutes ago, that is some kinds of transmission, some kind of communication between your network and that phone, which is connected to various cell sites?
Yeah, these are voice and text messages.
Okay. And starting at, let's start at midnight, okay, on June 17th. I'd like you to look at the cell site information. Do the first few of those transmissions indicate that the same cell tower was used for a number of transmissions?
No, there's no cell tower information for these.
There's no cell tower information for those?
Yes.
And why is that, sir?
I believe this is because these were originations down our LTE network.
Okay, so there are a number of communications where there's no cell tower information, right?
Yes.
Okay. And then are there some data transmission information where there is cell tower information after midnight?
I don't see data transmissions on this report. This is voice and SMS, which is text.
Okay. Well, why don't you look through that entire document, because that's the same document we were testifying about on direct, and tell us if you can find in that document information regarding what cell towers were communicating with this particular phone, this 3008 phone, between midnight and 2:30 a.m. on the morning of June 17th.
Okay, I see some.
Okay. So, and just for the record, what page of the document are you looking on, if there's a page?
There's no page number.
All right. But the page that you're looking at, and what's the exhibit number again of that exhibit? I think it's on the back of the whole thing somewhere. For the record, let me just find it. I think it's either 255 or 258, but let's figure it out. No, I can't find it. 255.
Okay.
All right. So the page of Exhibit 255 that you're looking at, that gives you information about what cell tower 3008 was using to communicate between midnight and 2:30 a.m. on the 17th, right?
Yeah, there's a variety of times here, including June 16th through 17th.
All right, so
Yes.
let's talk about June 17th starting at midnight, okay? So what's the first communication?
It's 1:16 a.m. on
Okay.
June 17th.
Okay, and what's the one before that?
11:22 p.m. on June 16th.
Okay, and the cell tower that the phone was communicating with at 11:22, is that what you said?
Yes.
11:22
Yes.
p.m. on the 16th. Do you recognize where that cell tower is?
Not from this, no. This
Well,
does.
from anything, any of your knowledge about cell towers or anything that you talked about earlier, do you happen to recognize which cell tower that is or where it is?
This is not for that purpose. The purpose of this record is to show a call detail record. It does not list, it lists the cell ID, which is a cell tower location, but this report doesn't contain the location information of that tower.
Well, isn't that the same exhibit that you were testifying about 5 minutes ago?
Yes.
So what is the difference between, I'm just confused, what is the difference between the questions that Mr. Baumberg was asking you about cell tower location and the questions I'm asking you about cell tower location?
It's not a case of a difference. It's, I had another database of record to cross-reference the cell ID to the location, and I put that report together. Actually, they put the report together. I reviewed it all and corroborated it, that those were the locations.
Okay, so the testimony that you gave this jury both yesterday and this morning on direct examination about cell tower location did not come from that document, right?
Right.
It came from some other document that is not in evidence, that was prepared by the district attorney's office and given to you, right?
Well, we disclosed our cell tower locations to the DA.
And they produced a document, which is not in evidence, which you reviewed and that you were using as the basis of your testimony, right?
They submitted the locations on a map, and they put it together.
Right.
Because I think they wanted all the maps to look fairly similar amongst the other different carriers. So that was given to me, and I analyzed it, and I made sure prior to this testimony that it was in fact correct.
Okay, so they put together the presentation that they wanted you to make in court, right?
Yes.
Okay. And that presentation was based not on the document that's in your hand, which is the exhibit that was introduced into
It was
evidence.
based, but there was another source that was used.
Okay. And the other source is not in evidence, right?
I don't believe so.
Okay. And you can't answer my questions about what tower was communicating with that phone, that is the 3008 phone, the same phone. You can't answer my questions about what tower that phone was communicating with at any times other than what the prosecution wanted you to focus on without accessing some other materials, right?
Yes.
I have no further questions.
Good. Thank you, Counselor. You may.
Now, I believe yesterday, Mr. Quinn, you indicated that T-Mobile maintains a database that shows the location of each and every one of those cell sites that are identified in that record, Exhibit 255, correct?
Correct.
And you're not the keeper of the records, you're the RF engineer, correct?
Correct.
And do you know Ray McDonald?
Yes.
He is a keeper of the records, correct?
Correct.
And Mr. McDonald actually works in the portion of the company that, among other things, is responsible for maintaining and presenting the record of the database that contains the cell site locations of the cell sites that are identified in that exhibit number 255, correct?
Correct.
Now, you have before you exhibit number 256. Can you tell the jurors, please, what 256 is, please?
It's a T-Mobile tower database.
For the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, correct?
Correct.
And is that the database that you used in order to locate each and every one of those towers on the maps that you've described?
Correct.
And it's fair to say you were asked to go out and locate the cell sites that you described here before these jurors yesterday and this morning, correct?
Correct.
And you relied on the T-Mobile records of the locations of where those cell sites were, is that true?
True.
And you confirmed with your own eyes that those were your locations at the sites as you've described them, correct?
Correct.
And did Mr. Sultan ever ask you to go out to a particular location?
No.
And,
I'm going to strike that question and that
Well-
answer. You should disregard it.
okay. Did you go to the places that you were asked to go to?
I did.
Okay. Now, Mr. Sultan showed you exhibit number 258, I believe.
Just a reminder, the Commonwealth has the burden of proof in this case. That burden never shifts. A defendant has no obligation ever to produce any evidence. You may proceed.
Mr. Sultan showed you exhibit number 258. This T-Mobile record doesn't contain the cell locations, true?
True.
And you have to actually use the exhibit 255 in order to locate the cell sites on the record, correct?
Correct.
Now, these times for the SMS in this record, exhibit number 258, for the SMSs are actually in Pacific time, correct?
Yes.
And so, looking at the this record of June 17th, all of those incoming calls and texts are actually located in the first portion of exhibit number 255 under the heading of combined detail. Is that true?
True.
And when you're looking for the data detail, you have to go to the section that says data detail, a different section of exhibit 255. Is that correct?
Correct.
Now, Mr. Sultan asked you about calls up until 2:30, right?
Yes.
And it's fair to say that on June 17th of 2013, after 2:30 in the morning, there were no outgoing calls from Odin Lloyd's cell phone. True?
True.
And the incoming calls prior to 2:30 in the morning, the 3 calls prior to that came into Mr. Lloyd's phone. Is that correct?
Correct.
And they came into, and I'm just going to show you exhibit number 158. Those 3 immediately prior calls to Mr. Lloyd's cell phone all came from that telephone number, 4304. Is that correct?
Correct.
And after that last call, at 2:32 in the morning, listed there on the record, there was never another outgoing call from Mr. Lloyd, correct?
Correct.
And looking at the texts now in Exhibit 258, you have to actually add 3 hours to the time here on this exhibit that Mr. Sultan was showing you, right?
Yep.
There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 texts immediately after 2:32 in the morning, beginning at 3:07 a.m., correct?
Correct.
And all of those are to the same, back and forth between the same telephone number, 8341. Is that true?
True.
And then after that, there's never another outgoing text for Mr. Lloyd's phone, correct?
Correct.
Nothing further.
Well, Mr. Quinn, let's get back to what I was asking you about, which is the period between midnight and 2:30, okay? Same date, June 17th, 2013. And in fact, there are a number of outgoing calls from that phone, 3008, which the prosecutor identified as a phone belonging to Odin Lloyd, after midnight, right?
Right.
Okay. And you can't tell us anything about the location of the cell site that that phone was using when those calls were made, right?
I was asked to analyze the data detail records.
Well, we're going to get in a minute to what you were asked to analyze. But based on all the stuff that's in evidence, you're not able to tell us anything about the location of those cell sites, right?
That were used for voice calls? No. Or text?
Okay.
No.
And can you tell from the records that you were shown that, in fact, different cell sites were used for a number of those calls?
The record that I was just showed?
Yes, sir.
No, I can't tell locations.
You can't tell one way or the other?
No.
Okay. Now, you went only to the cell sites that the prosecution asked you to go to, right?
True.
Okay. And the time that you spent doing that work, that was paid for by the prosecution, right?
I'm unaware of how that's paid. I'm
You
unaware.
didn't get the money, right?
I didn't get money.
Okay, but you don't know whether or not they have a contract with T-Mobile that covers your time, right?
No.
Okay. You don't know that, am I correct?
Correct.
Okay. And you told us earlier that the prosecution prepared what you referred to as a combined report, right?
Correct.
Okay. And that was a report that they prepared as an outline for your presentation in court, right?
Well, the data detail record is produced by T-Mobile.
Yes? And then they prepared what you described as a combined report, right?
When you say combined report, do you mean all the calls, texts, and
Well, I
data
thought, well, you referred earlier, sir, to some report or some document that was prepared by the prosecution, right?
Right.
Okay. And why don't you tell us what that was?
So I think Ray McDonald, he's the keeper of records. He sent the call detail records and the cell site information to the prosecution. They put together their own maps and analysis, and that was submitted to me.
Okay.
While at work, I analyzed the locations when the calls were made, and I corroborated, or I made sure that all that information in there was accurate.
Okay. So they sent you basically a specific presentation including cell sites and times and locations, and then you basically check that out, and then you use that as a basis for your presentation.
Yes.
No further questions.
You may sit down.
I do.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
Would you state your full name, please?
Maureen McCabe,
Could you spell your last name?
McCabe.
And do you work, ma'am?
Yes, I do.
Where do you work?
I work at the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab.
And how long have you worked there?
Over 9 years.
And what type of work do you do at the Massachusetts Crime Lab?
I'm a DNA analyst at the crime lab.
And just describe what are your duties as a DNA analyst?
As a DNA analyst, I will process samples from known individuals to get a DNA profile, and usually these are known, or these are saliva or blood samples.
Can you just tell us generally what is DNA?
DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. It's the molecule that contains all of your genetic information, which is the building block to make you who you are. Half is inherited from your mother and half from your father. Your DNA is present in all of the cells of your body, and it's the same throughout your body. No two people have the same DNA profile except for identical twins.
And can you just describe your educational background in this area?
Yes, I have a bachelor's degree from Syracuse University in psychology. I have an associate's degree in biotechnology specializing in forensic science from Massachusetts Bay Community College. And I have a master's degree in biomedical forensic science from Boston University.
And when you completed your educational background, at some point, did you do other work before working as a DNA analyst?
Yes, I also worked at the crime lab as a DNA technician. I did quality control work in the DNA unit.
Okay. And currently, do you have additional duties in addition to being an analyst?
I'm an analyst, and I'm also a DNA unit supervisor.
Approximately, when you indicated that you prepare or work on known standards, just if you would describe what that is.
A known standard is a sample that comes from an individual whose identity is known. It's usually a blood or saliva sample that comes directly from that person, and we process that in order to get a DNA profile.
Okay. And just describe, how does that come to you for testing or analysis?
The blood or saliva sample comes dried on a piece of specialized paper, and it's contained within an envelope which is marked with the case number, the person's name, and it's also sealed by the person who prepared it.
And over the course of your time with the crime lab, approximately how many known standards have you worked on and developed DNA profiles?
I've processed over 5,000 samples.
And during the course of your time there, do you take proficiency or competency examinations?
Yes, I did.
And how frequently is that?
Well, competency tests are given when you're learning each new procedure, and you have to have a competency test before you can perform that procedure on casework. You must pass it. And proficiency tests are given to DNA analysts twice a year, and that's given to us from an outside agency where the answers are not known to us. And we take this test in order to show that we have, that we're still competent in the overall DNA analysis process.
And have you been deemed proficient over the course of those proficiency exams?
Yes, I have.
Now, if you would, just describe for us the process that you follow when you get a known standard, either blood or saliva.
When I'm assigned a particular case, I will request that evidence from our Sudbury Evidence Unit that is transported to the Maynard Laboratory where I am located, and I will retrieve that from the evidence, the secure evidence locker, and bring that into the laboratory to work on that.
And when you receive this sample, just describe, how does it appear to you?
It's usually within an envelope. It's a specialized envelope that was created by the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab for containing blood and saliva standards. It has it just has information on the outside to tell you what sample is located on the inside of that package.
Okay. And then what do you do with regard to a sample to begin the process of developing a DNA profile?
For DNA processing, it's a four-step process. The first step is called extraction, where we use chemicals and heat in order to separate the DNA from the cells. The next step is quantitation, where we measure how much DNA we've then recovered from the cells. The third step is amplification, where we use special chemicals to target specific areas of the DNA. And these are the areas that we use for DNA profiling. We want to make millions of copies of those particular sections of DNA so that we have enough to generate a profile. And the fourth step is analysis and detection, where we separate those DNA fragments by size on an instrument, and then we use a computer software program to then visualize that DNA profile.
Now, at some point, did you receive a known standard relating to case number 13-11925?
Yes, I did.
And was there an item number associated with that?
Yes, it was item 16-1.
And whose known standard was that?
That was the known blood standard for Odin Lloyd.
And after receiving that, did you perform DNA analysis on that?
Yes, I did. I used the 4 steps that I previously mentioned.
And as a result of performing the 4 steps, were you able to develop a DNA profile?
Yes, I did.
And when you referred to after the information that you get, do you then chart that information?
Yes, the electropherogram that we get from the computer program looks like some peaks. It's similar to what an electrocardiogram looks like with peaks and valleys. But numbers are assigned to those pardon me, numbers are assigned to those peaks, and those numbers are put onto a chart, and that represents the DNA profile.
And after the chart, what do you do with the chart after you develop the known DNA profile for a known person?
The chart is then put into a file that I've created, which contains all of the worksheets that track that processing of that sample throughout all the DNA analysis. That file is then reviewed for technical accuracy and also administratively reviewed to make sure there are no errors in the file. And once that file is reviewed, it's then approved, and that report that I created is available in our electronic management system for the next analyst to use for their comparative analysis.
And I'm just going to show you this document and ask you if you recognize it.
Yes, I do.
What do you recognize this to be?
That is the known profile for Odin Lloyd.
Okay. And how do you recognize this?
At the top, there is a sample description, which has the person's name and the type of sample that it is, whether it was a blood sample or saliva, and also the item number that is given to each specific item in the case. Each item in a case gets a unique item number.
And do you know who created this chart?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Your Honor, I'd offer this is the next exhibit.
Objection.
It's the next exhibit.
I'm just going to place it's now marked 293 on the overhead. Is that the document I just showed you at the side rail?
Yes, it is.
Now, if you would just describe the information contained in this chart, beginning at the top.
On the top line, it says STR results table.
And what does that mean, STR result?
STR stands for short tandem repeats, and those are the specific areas on the DNA strand that we're looking for. Those in that third step where we're doing amplification and we're amplifying, making many copies of specific areas, regions of DNA, we're looking for the specific regions that have a repeating code that's repeated over and over again, and the number of times this DNA sequence is repeated is equal to the number that would appear further down on the chart. So if we had 14 repeats of a particular DNA sequence, the number 14 would then appear in the software program that we use that shows us what the DNA profile is.
In the DNA, the code you're referring to, do humans have unique code, DNA code?
About 99.9% is not unique between people. It's the 0.1% that we're looking at that is different between individuals.
Okay. Do any two people have the same DNA?
Only twins, identical twins.
Now, the next line here, exemplar samples, allele types, and repeat units. Just explain what that is.
Exemplar is just another word that we use for a known standard, a sample that comes from someone that we know, a known individual. And allele type and repeat units. So the allele is that number that comes below, so that tells us how many repeating sequences there were, or how many repeating units of that sequence there were at that particular location. So the allele is just the different form, whether it's a 14 or a 29. That just tells us how many repeating segments there were.
And the next line here, the sample description in KBS Oden-Lloyd. What does KBS mean?
KBS stands for Known Blood Standard, and the name of the person is always listed on the report under the sample description.
Okay. And then the next line, item number.
Item number, each item in the case is given a unique item number. There's a parent item that were first given, which would have been 16-1. That would have been the blood tube that was submitted to the laboratory. That blood is then swatched onto a specialized paper, so that would then be considered item 16-1.1, and then I took a sampling from that, so then there's another 0.1 from that to show that I've taken a sample from this particular item.
And is the blood swatch and the blood sample, is that maintained?
Usually the blood tube, the original blood tube, is destroyed because we have the blood swatched onto the specialized paper to preserve.
Okay. So when you take a cutting from that paper, what portion of the cutting, or what portion of the blood standard are you taking?
We don't usually need a very large cutting from the paper. I use a specialized puncher tool. You can think of it like a hole punch for a piece of paper, and it takes about a 4mm size punch, and I can use that for my processing to get the profile.
Now, as we move down, could you just explain what the left-hand column, what are these?
Those are the names of the locations that we use for DNA profiling. Those are the different names of locations on the DNA strand. Any of the ones that start with a D tells you which chromosome those were located on. So the first one, D8, S11, 79, tells me that that location is on chromosome 8. Sometimes the chromosome location will have a different nomenclature, and it will be called either something like you see lower down with letters CSF or TH01, and that's just telling the location where it is on a chromosome.
And how many of those locations are looked at?
We test 15 locations plus 1 for sex determination.
And is the sex determination shown on this chart?
Yes, it's shown under where it says ML for amelogenin, and a female would have 2 X's in that location, and a male has an X and a Y in that location.
And the corresponding numbers now on the right-hand side of this chart, just explain what those relate to.
Well, those are the alleles, so that's the different forms of DNA that are at each of those locations. So that shows us how many repeating units there were in a row at that location from each of the 2 chromosomes that you have. So one set would be contributed from your mother and one from your father. So you would have 2 numbers at each location. Sometimes, such as at the top one, there will be 2 numbers that are the same, and that just means that on each of your chromosome 8 at that location, there was a repeat of 14 units on each of the 2 chromosomes. And further down, we can see the numbers are different under CSF 1PO. The numbers are different because on each of those 2 chromosomes, the repeat sequence was different in length.
And were you able to find or locate numbers at all these locations?
Yes, I was able to get a full profile.
Sometimes if that's not the case, based on the sample, is there some other notation made in lieu of a number?
There would be, yes.
So would this represent a complete DNA profile of Odin Lloyd?
Yes, it does.
And as you've indicated, that information is then electronically filed?
Yes, we have an electronic system for tracking all of the items that come in for cases, and all of the items are tracked electronically in there, and then our reports are stored electronically in there as well.
Okay, and who is that made available to?
And people that work in the crime lab.
Okay, and is the profile then used for other purposes? I think you had indicated earlier, for comparative purposes?
Yes, another analyst would do the crime scene or unknown samples, and they would use this for comparison purposes to compare to the profiles that they generated.
Okay. Would it also be used for statistical purposes?
This profile would not be used for statistical purposes.
Thank you.
Could I just see Council?
Good morning, Ms. McCabe.
Good morning.
Am I correct? You work for the Mass State Police Crime Lab?
Yes.
Okay. But am I correct? You work on the civilian side of the lab as opposed to the uniform side?
That's correct.
Okay. And am I correct that each of those, and you're a supervisor on the civilian side, right?
Yes.
And am I correct that each of those sides of the laboratory, the civilian side on the one hand and the state police, the uniform side on the other, each has its own lines of authority, right?
That's true, yes.
Okay. So on the civilian side, the forensic scientists on the civilian side report, are civilians, right?
Yes.
And they report to other civilians, right?
Yes.
Okay. And on the uniform side, the state police officers working on that side report to other state police officers, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And ultimately, we all report to the lab director and our division commander.
Okay. But before you get all the way to the top, there are 2 separate units, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you obtained and developed a DNA, you obtained a blood sample and developed a DNA profile of Odin Lloyd, right?
Yes.
Okay. And is that the only DNA profile that you developed in this case?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Now, I'm just going to ask you a little bit about the DNA, the science that you talked about a few minutes ago, I'll try not to get too technical, okay? You told us a few minutes ago that no two people have the same DNA other than identical twins, right?
Correct.
Okay. And am I correct that DNA is, it's a molecule, right?
Yes.
Okay. And the DNA, which is really teensy, right?
Yes.
Okay. And the DNA molecule, inside that teensy DNA molecule, there are 24 chromosomes, right?
24 pairs, yes.
24 pairs of chromosomes, okay. And each of those 24 pairs of chromosomes has hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of little specific spots, right?
Yes, there'd be the bases.
I'm
You're
sorry?
referring to. They each have, there would be bases along the DNA strand.
Okay, but each of those so when you say strand, that's chromosome, right?
Yes.
Okay. And each of those, on each of those 24 pairs of strands, there are millions of little individual spots, which are called loci, is that right?
Well, the loci are the locations that we look at. So those are specific locations along the strand,
Okay, well,
not...
we're going to get to that in a second.
Okay.
But in addition to the locations that you look at, there are millions of other locations, right?
Correct.
Okay. And out of those millions of locations on the DNA chromosomes that are inside the teensy DNA molecule, you only look at 15 of those spots, right?
Correct.
Okay. Now, you're not telling this jury, are you, that no two people have the same reading at each of those 15 spots, are you? Yes or no?
No, they wouldn't have the same DNA profile unless they were identical twins.
Well, at those 15 spots, in fact, as a forensic scientist, you can't tell us that nobody has the same profile at each of those 15 spots, can you?
Well, there have been studies done that only identical twins will show the same profile.
So you're telling us that, based on your knowledge as a forensic scientist, that you can say conclusively that DNA, that a particular DNA profile found in a piece of evidence belongs to one and only one person on the face of the earth? Is that what you're telling us?
Based on all of the scientific evidence that we use in order to support our findings, yes, only identical twins will have the same DNA profile.
You're telling us that on the face of the earth, no two people, other than identical twins, can have the same DNA profile. Is that what you're telling this jury?
Well, we-
I think, just to clarify, I believe Counsel, when using DNA profile, is talking about the entire...
At these 15 locations, Your Honor, I'm not talking about, at these 15 locations, are you telling this jury that no two people...
So just the focus is simply on these specific 15 locations and not one's entire DNA profile.
Thank you, Your Honor. With respect to these 15 locations, which are the only locations that you look at, are you telling this jury that no two people other than identical twins on the face of the earth can have the same profile or the same reading, the same numbers at each of those 15 locations? Is that what you're telling us?
We can't test everyone on the earth, so according to all of the scientific research that has been done, that is what has been found.
May we approach the bench, Your Honor?
subsequently just advise you that this witness has not been called to render an opinion as to the uniqueness of DNA, other than as to the entirety of a DNA molecule, not been called to render any opinion as to the uniqueness of any particular number of segments. Her testimony in that regard is ordered stricken and should be disregarded by you.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have no further questions.
You may sit down.
Thank you.
Your Honor, if we could call our next witness, Lindsay Bird, please.
You can please face the clerk and raise your right hand.
Do solemnly swear that your testimony will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Proceed.
Thank you.
May I, Your Honor? Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
State your full name,
My name is Lindsay Bird.
and how do you spell your first name?
My first name, Lindsay.
And how about your last name?
Bird.
And do you work?
I currently work at the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab,
How long have you worked there?
approximately 3 years.
And prior to, well, let me ask you this, what type of work do you do there?
I'm a forensic scientist in the DNA unit.
And prior to working as a forensic scientist in the DNA unit, what was your educational background?
I have a Bachelor's of Science in Microbiology from the University of New Hampshire, a Master of Science in Microbiology from the University of Hawaii, and a Master of Science in Forensic Science from the University of New Haven.
Can you describe for us your duties as a forensic scientist in the DNA unit?
Yes. In my current position, I process known samples for DNA profiles to be compared to samples of unknown origin.
And approximately how many samples have you analyzed or tested?
At this point, it will be around 1,000.
Can you just describe the process that you follow when you're testing known samples of DNA?
Yes, in general, it's a 4-step process that we apply to every sample that we test.
And can you tell us what is the first step of that process?
Yes, the first step is called extraction.
And what is extraction?
During extraction, we'll just apply heat and chemicals to help break open the cells in order to access the DNA.
And after, presuming you're able to extract DNA, what's the next step?
The next step is called quantitation.
And what does that mean, quantitation?
Quantitation is kind of what it sounds like. You're looking for a quantity. It's a test that we run on the sample to tell us approximately how much DNA is in it.
And after you quantitate the DNA, what do you do from there?
Then the third step is called amplification.
And just describe what that is.
Sure. During amplification, we use a process called PCR, which stands for polymerase chain reaction. And this is a natural process that the cell uses to make new DNA. And we're able to mimic it in the lab in order to make millions of copies of specific areas that we're interested in to make a DNA profile.
Now, after those 3 steps, is there a final step?
There is. The final step is called detection.
And just tell us about that, please.
Sure. During detection, we'll run that amplified sample through an instrument called a genetic analyzer. And this instrument is able to detect those regions that we amplified. And we look at 16 regions. And it will show us the profile like a series of peaks, kind of like on a heart monitor or an echocardiogram. And each of those peaks is assigned a different number. And we will report the DNA profile as that series of numbers.
Now, at some point, did you do testing related to case number 13-11925?
Yes, I did.
And was there a certain item that was sent to you?
Yes, that was item 60-1.
Okay, and what was that item?
That item was a known saliva standard from Aaron J. Hernandez.
And did you test that item?
Yes, I did.
And how did you go about testing it?
I used the four-step process that I just described.
And as a result of that testing, did you get any results?
I did.
And were you able to then chart those results?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And is that standard for you once you get your results to then reduce your findings to a chart?
Yes.
I'm just going to show you this document, ask you if you recognize it.
Yes, I do.
What do you recognize that to be?
This is a copy of my results table
And that's the results for,
for item 60-1.
and the name of that is?
The known saliva standard from Aaron J. Hernandez.
Okay.
Move on to the next exhibit.
I'm just placing the document I've just shown you is now marked 294. You see that all right?
Yes.
Can you just generally describe what does this chart represent?
The left-hand column in bold are the names of the 16 locations that I talked about that we are interested in for the profile. And the right-hand column has the name of the item at the top and the item number, and then the numbers listed below it are the DNA profile.
And so, with regard to the left of these particular locations of DNA.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
I'm sorry, in terms of the location, just describe this column here, these locations.
Yeah, so those are the 16 specific spots that we look at and amplify during our processing to produce the profile on the right for each location.
Okay. And then the numbers that you find, just describe what those are.
Those are what we call alleles. You inherit half of your DNA from your mother and half from your father, so you get one allele from each parent, which is why there's two numbers in each spot.
And DNA just generally, is that unique to individuals or is that common to individuals?
DNA in general?
Yeah, just DNA in general.
Yeah, it's all humans have it, yes.
Okay, and what percentage do all humans share?
I believe it's over 99%.
Okay, and what about the remaining?
It differs between individuals, which allows us to use DNA in this context.
And what about with regards to identical twins? Do they share similar or different DNA?
As far as we're concerned, we cannot tell identical twins apart with our testing.
I see. So would this represent, 294 would represent the DNA profile of Aaron J. Hernandez?
Yes, it would.
And to the extent, were there any locations that you were unable to find information, DNA information?
No, there were not.
Just one last thing with regard to when you do your testing, does DNA come in two different forms to you? Let me ask you this. Do you sometimes test DNA from blood?
Yes.
And is there a different way of testing it as well?
No, we usually treat them the same. It doesn't differ if we're using blood or saliva.
Okay. And with regards to the testing that you conducted on the known sample of Aaron Hernandez, what type of sample was it?
It was a saliva sample.
And how is that collected?
It's collected on a storage card that allows us to store DNA on a special paper.
But how is a saliva sample collected?
Typically, it's a swab of the inside of the mouth to collect saliva and cheek cells that are in there, and then it's stored on the storage card.
And just saliva itself, does that contain any DNA?
The cells in the saliva contain DNA.
Okay. And is that the cells that break down in your mouth?
Yes.
And do you know who collected the buccal swab?
I do.
Yeah, who was that?
It was Sherry Hernandez.
Thank you.
Good morning, Ms. Berg.
Good morning.
Am I correct that you work on the civilian side of the crime lab?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And you're a forensic scientist?
Yes.
Now, you mentioned to us on direct examination a word called quantification, right?
It was quantitation.
Ah, quantitation. All right. And quantitation, is that figuring out how much DNA you've got in what you're testing?
Approximately how much, yes.
Okay. And you do that before you do that process of making millions and millions of copies, right?
Yes.
Okay. And when you quantitate DNA, you measure it in a unit of measure called a nanogram, right?
Yes.
And a nanogram, is that 1,000th of a gram?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And because there's a certain amount of DNA that you need to make this whole testing process happen, right?
Yes.
Okay. And is the amount of DNA and different, and labs have different standards or protocols for how much DNA you need to run this whole testing process, right?
Yes.
Okay. And in your lab, if you have, say, half a nanogram, 0.5 nanograms of DNA, is that enough DNA to try to amplify and profile and do the testing process?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And half a nanogram, that's 0.5, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, in Exhibit 294, so this is the chart. This is a chart that was generated from your work, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And this chart sets forth the DNA profile at these particular spots on the DNA molecule or chromosomes of my client Aaron Hernandez, right?
Yes, it does.
Okay. And at the bottom of this, it says KSS, right?
Yes.
And KSS stands for known saliva sample, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you told us a few minutes ago that the reason that you use a saliva sample to obtain someone's DNA profile is because there are cells from the inside of the mouth typically found in saliva, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And am I correct, Ms. Bird, that you're familiar with the protocols of your laboratory, of course, right?
Yes.
Okay. And under the protocols of your laboratory, am I correct that chewed gum, that is chewing gum that's been chewed by an individual, can be used as a reference sample?
Yes, it can in cases that we don't have a normal reference sample. We can use gum.
You can use chewed gum, right?
Yes.
All right. And why can you use chewed gum as a reference sample?
Because, again, the saliva that's on it contains skin cells from the inside of the mouth.
Okay. And that means DNA, right?
Yes.
Okay. And so you obtained the saliva sample of Aaron Hernandez and generated his profile, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Did you generate a profile for anyone else in this particular case?
No, I did not.
Thank you, Ms. Bird. That's all I have here.
You may sit down.
Thank you, Your Honor.
I'm going to call Diane Fife, please. Well, I beg your pardon, Ron. It's now Diane B. Gotti, married.
Please face the clerk, raise your right hand. You solemnly swear that your testimony will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Proceed.
Thank you, Ron. Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
Would you state your full name, please?
Yes, my name is Diane Fife Biagiotti. It's Diane Fife Biagiotti.
And ma'am, do you work?
Yes, I do.
Where do you work?
I work for the Massachusetts State Police Crime Laboratory.
And how long have you worked there?
Almost 7 years.
And how are you currently assigned?
I am assigned to the DNA unit.
And how long have you been in the DNA unit?
Almost 7 years.
What type of work do you do in the DNA unit?
I process biological samples from pieces of evidence that contain biological fluids, such as blood, semen, or saliva, in order to develop a DNA profile from those items. I then compare the DNA profile that I develop to the DNA profiles of known individuals, people of interest within a case, to determine if they could have come from the same source. I then generate reports and testify to my findings.
Could you just briefly describe your educational background?
Yes. I have a bachelor's in biology from the University of Massachusetts, Amherst, and I've completed necessary coursework in biochemistry, molecular biology, genetics, and statistics.
Can you tell us about the training that you have in the area of DNA?
Yes. I completed an intensive 7-month DNA Academy training program in order to meet federal requirements for DNA analysts. Training included analysis of approximately 40 samples, interpretation of approximately 20 data sets, written and oral exams, as well as competency tests. During this training period, I also completed a 40-hour mixture interpretation and statistical analysis course.
And do you, in the course of your tenure, do you still have to sit for or take proficiency tests?
Yes, I do.
How frequently are those administered?
Twice a year.
And who administers them?
The proficiency tests, they're assigned by our quality assurance unit, but they actually come from a third party. They're purchased from a vendor lab.
Okay. And have you been deemed proficient in the area of DNA analysis?
Yes.
Now, approximately during your time with the DNA lab, approximately how many samples have you conducted DNA testing on?
I would say several hundred.
And I'd like to direct your attention to the case number, lab number 13-11925. Did you, were you involved in any testing of items submitted on that number?
Yes, I was.
Okay. Approximately how many items did you test?
It was 16 items.
And just beginning, do you recall, did these items come in batches?
Yes.
And the first batch that you received, when was that?
That was in June of 2013.
And do you recall what those items were?
Yes, I do.
items were, item number 1-1.1 was swab from discharged cartridge casings.
Okay. And
Item
I'm sorry, with regard to that, that was 1-1. When you say discharge casings, there were swabs from more than one casing, is that right?
Yes.
And what was the next item that was submitted in June of 2013?
Yes. The next item in this batch was item number 2-1.4.
And what type of item was that?
That was swabs from the white towel.
Okay. And was there anything else submitted at that time?
Yes. Item number 2-1.5 was the hair from the white towel.
Okay. And anything else in that particular batch?
Yes. Item number 21-1.1 was the cigarette butt casing.
Okay. Now, just with regards, taking them in turn, the discharge, swabs from discharged cartridge casings, item 1-1, is it, are you referring to as 1-1.1, ma'am?
Yes.
And just describe why is the .1 on that item?
When an item comes into our lab, the case is assigned a case number, and then each group of evidence that is submitted to the lab gets the submission number, so that's where the 1 comes from. It was the first submission at the lab, and it was the first item of the first submission, so there's 1-1. And then when we sample, when we take a piece of swab of an item and we're creating a new piece of evidence from an item, we use the points. So it was the first piece of evidence taken off of the casings.
Okay. And when you take some part of an item, is there an effort made to retain another part for future examination or analysis?
Yes.
Okay. Now, was that done with regards to discharge casings 1-1.1?
In this case, it was not. This sample was considered quantity limited.
Just explain that. What does that mean, quantity limited?
It's a term that we use at the lab where through our validation and through our experience, certain item types yield very low quantities of DNA. So if we have an ample sample, we will cut the sample in half, we'll test half, and then we'll save the other half for future testing or for the defense. But when the item is expected to have a low amount of DNA on it, then we deem it quantity limited, and we consume the entire item in best effort of getting results.
And based on your training experience, discharge swabs of discharged cartridge casings, is that a quantity limited situation?
Yes.
And so as a result of that, those items, just tell us what you did with regard to the swabs from the discharged cartridge casings.
Yep, I processed these samples in the laboratory. I went through the 4 laboratory steps in general.
Can you just explain what those, briefly explain what those steps are?
Yes. The first step is extraction. This is where I start with a sample in a tube, a piece of evidence in a tube. I apply heat and chemicals to the sample in order to break open the cells on the sample. And then we use an automated DNA extraction robot to clean up the sample. The second step is quantitation, and this is where I use an instrument to determine approximately how much DNA I have in the sample. The third step is the amplification step, also called PCR, or polymerase chain reaction. And at this point, we make millions and millions of copies of the specific regions of DNA that we need to look at. It's somewhat like molecular Xeroxing, and what we do in the lab mimics the natural process that happens within your body. And then the fourth step is called capillary electrophoresis, CE for short. And at this step, we separate the pieces of DNA by their size in order to develop the DNA profile, and this instrument gives us the profile.
Okay. And so when you get a profile, what do you do with that? Just generally speaking, what would you do once you develop a profile?
Once we develop the profile, we get the information out of the computer. We read the data and review it, and then from there I would go into the report writing stage.
Okay. So at some point after getting your data, do you reduce that to a chart?
Yes.
And then later on, are you able to use that chart to compare it against either known standards or even unknown profiles?
Yes.
Now, with regard to the discharge cartridge casings, just tell us what were the results of your testing of those items?
Yes. It was actually insufficient DNA for STR fragment analysis was extracted from this item.
Okay, so could you just describe for us the different levels of the results of DNA, meaning from, you're saying insufficient, is there, do you have circumstances where there's just, that you learn there's no DNA?
Yes.
Okay, and how do you learn that?
At the second step in the lab is the quantitation step, and at that point we determine approximately how much DNA is in the sample. There's a certain amount of DNA that we need to develop a full profile. And so we use this step to determine if we have enough DNA to go forward. We do have a cutoff value that we use as a guideline. So sometimes if there's such a small amount of DNA present, it doesn't make it past the quantitation step because we know that we won't get any results from it. And sometimes we have just enough where we'll try and we'll send the sample forward to see if we can get results.
Okay. So with regard to the testing of item 1-1.1, the swab of the discharge cartridge casings, did you do the first step on this item?
Yes.
And that step was?
The extraction step.
Okay. And after extraction, you go to amplification?
The quantitation is
I
second.
beg your pardon. And at that step, are you able to determine whether you have enough DNA, whether there's actually DNA to justify going to steps 3 and 4?
Yes.
And in this case, as a result of your analysis of the swabs and the quantitation of the DNA on the swabs of discharge cartridge casing, were you able to determine whether there was enough DNA to go forward to steps 3 and 4?
For this sample, I did go forward, yes.
Okay. And was that based on a determination that there was DNA present?
Yes.
Okay. Now, you said there's a cutoff value there, that if there's insufficient at that stage, then you just wouldn't go any further.
Yes.
So as a result of finding DNA on the discharge cartridge casing, did you go to 3 and 4?
Yes.
And your results were?
My results were insufficient. I wasn't able to develop a DNA profile for this item.
Okay. And at that time, is there anything further you can do with regard to those items?
No.
Okay. Now,
That a DNA test may have resulted in
Insufficient conclusion is admitted for a limited purpose, namely to demonstrate that the DNA test was performed and that a result, even if insufficient, was obtained. Let me proceed.
thank you, Ron. Now, ma'am, you also indicated then there was another item that you received in June 2013. Do you remember the date that you had received this first batch of items?
The date that I began processing these samples was June 25th, 2013.
Okay. And on that date, do you recall, I think you mentioned there was also submitted swab from towel, items 2-1.4.
Yes.
Okay. And just tell us about that item.
My results?
Well, what did you do with it?
I went through the same steps. I went through the extraction, the quantitation, the amplification, and the capillary electrophoresis.
Okay. And what were the results of your analysis?
Yes. The DNA profile obtained from this item indicated the presence of a mixture of DNA from more than one source. The DNA profile obtained from this item yielded inconclusive results for comparison due to the quality and/or complexity of the profile.
Okay. And could you just describe for us when you say that there was a mixture, what do you mean by that?
Yes. We can see when we look at DNA results, everyone has either 1 or 2 pieces of DNA at every location that we look at, because you get half from your mom and half from your dad. So you have a max of 2 at every location. So when we see more than 2 pieces of DNA at certain locations, then we know that there is more than one contributor to the sample, that it's more than one person.
And did you find that to be the case in your analysis of the swabs from the towel?
Yes.
And as a result of that,
Let me again, just the same instructions apply. Evidence that a DNA test may have been inconclusive is admitted for a limited purpose, namely to demonstrate simply that the test was performed and that results, even if inconclusive, are obtained.
Thank you, Your Honor. And ma'am, as a result of then finding a mixture, you proceeded with the testing.
The mixture is determined at the end stage.
Okay.
So, yes,
So
when we
at
get
the
the profile, we can tell it's a mixture.
Right. And then at that time, did you attempt to identify or develop a DNA profile for either contributor to this mixture?
There wasn't anything else I could do with this mixture because of the insufficient quality of it.
Okay. And as a result of making that finding, there was nothing further you could do forensically on this samples?
Correct.
Now, I think you indicated that there was an additional, there are two additional items, but one was a hair from the towel,
Yes.
and that's item 2-1.5.
Yes.
Can you just tell us about that item and what you did?
Yes. For this item, I started with the extraction step, and then I moved to the quantitation step to determine how much DNA I had. And at this step, it was determined that there was no detectable human DNA present in this item. So testing for this sample was halted at the quantitation step.
Okay. And with regard to hair, is there certain parts of hair that you can test for DNA?
Yes, when we do DNA testing on hair, we're specifically looking at the root. The follicular tag it's essentially skin cells that come off the scalp and are attached to the hair, is what I'm looking to test.
Okay. Now, in this case, did the hair have such features?
Yes, it did have a follicular tag.
Okay. And is that a accepted method of testing for a hair with that follicular tag?
Yes.
And are you familiar with mitochondrial, the term mitochondrial DNA testing?
Somewhat, yes.
Is that an entirely different type of testing?
It is entirely different. We don't perform mitochondrial testing at the state lab.
Okay. But by testing, the DNA testing that you conduct, is that essentially then it excludes future testing of mitochondrial DNA?
Sustained.
Okay. What, if anything, can you do to test for mitochondrial DNA after you've done the DNA testing that you've conducted?
It's possible to send an extract forward for mitochondrial testing, but it's very unlikely to get results from that type of sample. The mitochondrial has a whole different procedure for lab extractions, and it's...
I object to this witness testifying about mitochondrial DNA testing if she doesn't have a foundation of knowledge on that subject. And I move to strike her testimony.
Sure. Are you familiar with mitochondrial DNA, the differences between mitochondrial DNA testing and the testing that you do?
I am in a general knowledge.
Okay. And what is your general knowledge?
My general knowledge is that we don't do mitochondrial testing at our lab, so I'm not trained in it. But I do know that we will sometimes use third-party laboratories to do mitochondrial testing when needed, and that it's a different science in general. It's different laboratory steps and different analysis methods.
And based on your understanding, can you do both?
I object again. She says she's not trained in it.
Objection at this stage is sustained, and we're going to take a morning recess at this time.
All rise for adjournment.